So how'd you do? Could you identify the living things from the non-living things? Were you pretty accurate? Or did you find that you had lots of misconceptions? Well, let's talk. How is it that scientists can decide that a rock is not living, water is not living, but little tiny bacteria, microscopic little organisms, they are living? So, how do we make that differentiation? Well, let me tell you, after lots of debate and research and studying, scientists have come up with seven characteristics that they believe all living things have in common. So let's take a look at that list. Now, these seven characteristics, and living thing must have all seven to be classified as living. So to be considered a living thing, you can't just do five of these characteristics. You can't just have five of them. You have to have all seven to be classified as living, at least as of right now. These ideas are constantly changing, and we're always learning more in science. So it's kind of this evolving process. But for now, what we do know is that all life must display these seven characteristics. So for right now, I'm just going to talk about a couple of them, and then in the next video, I'll discuss the next few characteristics. So number one, all living things have to be composed of cells. So you might have some background knowledge on what a cell is, and maybe you don't, and that's okay. We're going to learn more about that. Basically, what a cell is it's this microscopic, you cannot see it with your bare eye, this microscopic structure that all life is formed off of. So if you aren't made of cells, you're not living. Simple as that. That's like the number one defining feature, right? Is that you've got to be made of cells. Now, what does it mean to be a cell? Well, it's the specialization that occurs. So let's look at what's in front of us right now. It says, number one, all living things are composed of cells, correct? Right. But then it says single-celled, right? Right here, sorry. Single-celled organisms. So what that means is organisms that are made of just one tiny cell. Things like amoebas and sometimes some little parasites or bacteria, right? They have everything they need to be self-sufficient. If you're unaware what self-sufficient means that they can live all on their own. They don't need anything else. They can exist all on their own as this little teeny tiny microscopic organism, right? But you can be made of cells and you can be multicellular. So if we look here, in multicellular organisms, meaning you're made of multiple cells. You and I, we're made of 37 trillion cells. That's a lot. Okay, so you can be multicellular and still be classified as living, and we see that there's this massive specialization that happens in cells until they only do one thing. So if you didn't know this, there's these little cells inside of your nose. And these cells, they've got this material called cilia. It's these little hair-like projections. And cilia covers these cells, and its main job as a cell inside of your nose is to capture little particles in the air. And it captures them and it pulls them up your nasal passage, so that way you eventually swallow them. Your lungs don't like to be heavy with material. They're very flaccid and weak, and they don't want stuff sitting on them because then it becomes hard to breathe. So these little cilia, they pull all the little particles that you're breathing in all the time, and they make you swallow them so it goes into your stomach, and so you don't have to deal with it in your lungs. And that is their specialization, their one skill that they do. So sometimes we see that cells are existing in these single-celled, or sometimes we call that unicellular, meaning one, organisms. And sometimes we see cells become so complex inside of these multicellular organisms that they only do one single thing throughout their entire life cycle, right? All right, so let's look at the second one. Number one, all living things are composed of cells. Number two, we have organization. Now, if you look at a jellyfish doesn't look very organized to me. It's like this blob, right? Some organisms don't look very organized, but I promise you there is massive organization happening there. Now, I'm not talking about a messy binder or anything like that. I'm talking about specific jobs inside of an organism. So let's take a look at this graphic below. So it says right here, living things have different levels of cellular organization. So it all starts with atoms, right? And atoms are not living. Living things are made of atoms, yes, but just because something is an atom doesn't mean that it's living. So we start off with atoms, and atoms build up to make molecules. And hopefully you learned a little bit about that last year. Molecule might be something like water, H2O, right? And those things build up to create macromolecules. And what a macromolecule is, the best example, something we call amino acids or something we call DNA. Maybe you've heard of it before. It's your blueprint for your life. You're made of all of these complex atoms that have built up together to create a coded piece of information to create you, right? So we have atoms that build up to make molecules, that build up to make these macromolecules, which build up to create these things called organelles. Now, you've probably never heard that word before, but an organelle is just like a fancy way of thinking an organ for a cell. It does this little teeny tiny job inside of the cell to make sure that the cell can exist and do its daily functions. So then those organelles build up to create cells. Those cells build up to create tissues, like your muscle tissue, right? Or your nasal tissues, or your stomach tissues. And those tissues build up to create organs. And so this picture right here is of a stomach, right? So organs inside of our bodies. Your skin is an organ, if you didn't know that. Right? Those organs build up amongst themselves to create these like organ systems, like your digestive system, which is your esophagus, your stomach. They're even showing you a picture of a liver right there, right? Those accessory organs. Your large intestine, your small intestine. Actually, it goes like this: esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and then out your rectum and your anus. Oh my gosh, we're going to have so much fun learning weird things this year. It's going to be great. So you have both molecular organization, meaning the molecules in your body are organized, and you also have cellular organization happening inside of your body. So all living things are made of cells, and all living things are organized. All right, check out the next video to learn a little more.